what I wanted to say in kind of opening session. You mentioned sponsors already. Fantastic, record number of sponsors. This is our 5th ReMeMaRe conference because we had 2 combined with Coastal Futures, and this is a record number of sponsors as far as that's concerned. So thank you for sponsoring the conference. Hands up if it's your first time in Scarborough. Oh, good. We've brought some new people to North Yorkshire. Great. Fantastic. Well, hopefully you'll get a flavour of life in a coastal town for a short time. I certainly did last night with the gulls. Love them during the day, hate them during the night when they're making a right racket. So not much sleep last night, so I'm surviving on coffee. But please come back and explore the surrounding area. North Yorkshire coast is a fabulous environment and to explore, and along with the North York partners too at the doorstep, it's a wonderful place to visit. I wanted to start this year's conference with a personal reflection on ReMeMaRe, because we're quite a turning point in so many ways for our restoration ambition. New government in the air, what will that mean for our restoration for the future? And it seemed like a good time to take stock and look back on some of our achievements as a partnership and look forward to how ReMeMaRe will continue to shape our ambition in the future. And Joe Ratcliffe, my new project manager, is here to help do that as well in a few minutes. This is the beach at Skinning Grove, for those of you a bit more local. Just north of Scarborough, and it's where I first crawled in the sand 55 years ago, next to the town of Loftus, where I was born. Back then, the area suffered a severe decline in coal mining, steel industries, leading to Loftus having one of the highest unemployment rates in England during the 80s. And recent DEFRA research, as I'm sure some of you are familiar, has highlighted ongoing challenges in coastal towns like Loftus and Skinning Grove, which face greater deprivation than inland areas. So this year, at our 5th ReMeMaRe conference, I wanted to emphasise the need to address social deprivation, as well as obviously habitat loss and environmental failures, and the need for equality and inclusion, whilst restoring habitats brings all of the biodiversity benefits that we know about. The social impact is just as critical, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing a bit more about that in some of the presentations. And I'd like the next 5-year plan that we're developing dedicated to ensuring coastal communities, like the one that raised me, have access to the transformative opportunities that restoration of our target habitats brings, and that these communities have fair and equitable access to the resources they need to enable that to happen, which is really important. And we'll obviously be exploring some of those issues throughout the conference, how businesses through restoration can support local communities, and how partnership, collaboration and robust science can drive our ambitions for a resilient future. We've been on a remarkable journey for the last 5 years with you, our partners. It was never our intention to restore habitats from the get-go, more so to get to the point where we have a pipeline of investable projects that not only transform isolated specific habitats, but entire estuaries and coastal ecosystems. We were thinking big. In 2018, when my director issued a challenge to change the inertia of less than good status in our estuaries and coasts, we've tried to tackle this head on. And so we drew upon decades of experience creating salt marsh habitats with partners like RSPB and Wildfire and Wetland Trust with our flood and coast risk management. And we looked at the seagrass restoration project, literally taking root in Wales with Richard Unsworth and Project Seagrass, and the Natural England Remedies project in the southwest. And we found inspiration in the pioneering oyster restoration work of Bill Sanderson and his team at Heriot Watt and Marine Conservation Society in Glenmorangie. And from that foundation, Restoring Meadow, Marsh and Reef was created. Our conferences have built a practitioners network, inspired collaboration, and helped to advance restoration through shared learning and awareness of restoration opportunities. And that culminated in the handbooks, capturing the groundswell of knowledge and practical experience. We've identified areas of restoration potential, restoration principles have been established, and we've ensured that our ambition is reflected in route-based management plans at the coast, the Environment Improvement Plan and future flood risk management strategy at the coast too, all with a view to encouraging a pipeline of restoration projects. Without your help, we wouldn't have come this far. Many of you played a crucial role, whether it's sharing our knowledge and experience at these conferences or other conferences, specialising on the habitats that we're focusing on, contributing to our developing strategy through workshops, drafting guidance, or advising on restoration potential. This has truly been a collaborative effort, and each of you should be proud of the part that you have played. So what's next for the coming 5 years? Joe Ratcliffe is going to delve into that a little bit shortly, but we've identified 4 strategic approaches that will underpin our restoration efforts moving forward. Source to Sea is a transformative concept that emphasises the interconnectedness of the water environment, from the origins of freshwater catchments all the way to the sea and ocean. Embracing this holistic perspective is key for the success of ReMeMaRe. It's not just about practical restoration efforts in our estuaries and coastal waters, it's also about creating the right conditions for those efforts to succeed and promoting natural recovery by alleviating environmental pressures. To truly succeed, we need to focus on the flow of water quality, quantity and sediment supply and implementing robust protective measures. By adopting the Source to Sea approach, we can reduce the risk of restoration failure. Source to Sea also fosters equality throughout the entire system. It can empower coastal communities by giving them an equal voice and ability to design outcomes that meet local needs both on land and in the sea. A seascape approach goes beyond focusing on a single habitat. It considers the restoration needs of entire estuaries or coastal areas, emphasising connectivity and the critical mass of resource that is needed to sustain momentum in any given area. By pooling resources and fostering collaboration, we can achieve results that are greater than the sum of their parts in any given area. And our preferred restoration maps highlight the areas where seascape restoration has the potential to deliver the most significant benefits. And there's a poster to represent that in the session later today with Ben Green. And later today, Joe Preston is going to share more insights on that topic. And please discuss this slide presented as a poster with Ben later if you're interested in knowing how that came about in more detail. Natural capital. At the heart of Source to Sea and seascape restoration is the Natural Capital Ecosystem Assessment Programme, which some of you hopefully will have heard of. Again, there's a presentation, one of the at the back over there, so please engage with that if you can. And that's essentially plugging some of the gaps in evidence and providing the information and tools to support our projects and to give investors the confidence to finance restoration. The programme underpins the encouragement of a natural capital approach that enhances our knowledge of ecosystem services that can be derived from a restored environment to encourage that investment. Restoration only happens at the local level when all the key players, regulators, planners, industry professionals, academics and civil society come together with a shared vision of what they want to achieve in a place. To succeed, we need to empower and skill up our local communities to strengthen our project pipeline. The Championing Coastal Coordination Programme is intended in part to act as that spark to help support local partnerships. More on that tomorrow with Amy Pryor chairing a session on restoration through collaboration. So in conclusion, as we reflect on where we've got to, we find ourselves at quite a pivotal moment actually with huge potential for ReMeMaRe. It's an opportunity to create lasting impact, but it will require all of us, restoration practitioners, managers and policymakers, working together with commitment, passion and dedication to seize it. So let's rise to that challenge and transform that promise into a reality. And hopefully over the next couple of days, we'll all get to see how that reality is starting to come to pass. I'm going to hand over now to Joe, who's going to talk a little bit more about ReMeMaRe, current and future activity, and how that reality is really starting to come about.
Thanks everyone. Lovely to see so many of you here. It's great, isn't it, to see people face to face rather than on the screen. So looking forward to having a talk with you all later on throughout the 2 days. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Jo Ratcliffe. I'm new to the ReMeMaRe team. I work for the Environment Agency and I'm part of the newly formed Programme Office. I'm going to expand on Roger's talk and tell you about what we've been doing this year, about the Programme Office, what our plans are for the next 5 years, and also how you can get involved. So a quick reminder of what ReMeMaRe is all about, and we've got on here our vision and our mission statements. So that main aim is to get a minimum of 15% of our coastal and estuarine priority habitats restored by 2043. And I think you'll all know this is not an easy task to do. Our projects can often have a low success rate, they're complex, they can be time consuming and they can be costly. But we hope by working all together and using ReMeMaRe as a platform to facilitate your work, we'll be able to achieve this target. And as Roger has spoken about earlier, this year we see a new direction in ReMeMaRe with the creation of the Programme Office, and that's where my role sits with my colleague John Davies. And so it's our aim to use the tools that have already been developed through the partnership, but to accelerate practical restoration on the ground. So we're trying to increase the scope and the aim, but to increase the pace of restoration on the ground. So if you're anything like me, you might find it a bit confusing about how everything fits together, and this Venn diagram might not help, but I tried to, with Roger's help, I tried to put something together. So, as you can see, ReMeMaRe is just one part of the jigsaw, okay? So there's, as Roger's explained, there's other initiatives, other programs going along that help us get that target of 15% of habitats restored. So, as you can see, we've got the Natural Capital Ecosystem Assessment Programme, that's providing those tools and that evidence so that it gives us the confidence for people to invest. And we've got 3 Cs as well, which is building capacity, it's coordinating coastal restoration, but it's also looking at those wider benefits as well, so the wider benefits to the wider community. Then alongside these, we've got what I like to call opportunities. So it's those initiatives and those schemes that we should be trying to link into or that we should be aware of. So those are things such as your local nature recovery strategies, net gain, ELMS. There's lots of things out there that I won't have covered, but there's all those other opportunities that we need to think about. And then encompassing all that, we've got those drivers, those strategies and plans that help guide and direct habitat restoration. So we've got the Programme Office has a number of objectives this year, and some of that includes project delivery, looking about how we can secure funding, improve coastal coordination within the Environment Agency as well, developing our next 5-year plan with partners, and also looking at how we can fit habitat restoration into those strategies and policies. And along the way, we want to streamline the project delivery process. So we want to be able to make our project delivery a lot easier. We've got off to a good start by being able to deliver 11 salt marsh projects this year. So we were successful with a bid into the Water Environment Improvement Fund. And as you can see, we've been able to get a good spread around the country. These are partner-led projects, but they're being delivered alongside our Environment Agency area teams. Some of them are trialling new methods, some of them are continuations of existing projects, and some of the projects just needed that little bit of funding, that little initial funding to get them off the ground. So we want to use the experiences of delivering these projects to highlight the hurdles that we often face when delivering habitat restoration. And then once we've identified those issues, we can take them back to the ReMeMaRe partnership and try to resolve them. And in return, as a result, we'll be able to increase project delivery in the future. So alongside delivery, we're also looking at building our current project pipeline. So we don't want to just focus on salt marsh, we obviously want to look at other habitats as well. And the project pipeline is just a list of potential unfunded projects. So these could just be a project idea, just an idea off your head, or it could be something a little bit further down the line. And then using that information, we want to be able to demonstrate the need for more funding. Okay? We want to highlight what our aspirations are for habitat restoration. So this list could be used as a prospectus for future investment. And that could be by creating a new restoration fund. Maybe that's within DEFRA or the Environment Agency. It could be used by external investors to use, or it could be a way to link in with other schemes such as NetGate. Now, we're fully aware that the current annual funding schemes, the annual funding cycles, don't fit in with our projects at all. We all know that, as I said before, they're often quite time-consuming. Quite often they use new methods, so there's no evidence behind it, and quite often the feasibility phase is not funded. So again, we want to use that as evidence to make sure that we've got the right type of funding to become available. We can also use the pipeline as a bit of a way to coordinate projects as well, to make sure that we've got that seascape or that source to sea approach. So this gives you a bit of an idea of what we'll be doing this year, and then now to the future. So we've drawing to a close for that first 5-year plan, and now we're working with the partnership to develop about what we want to do for the next 5 years. And to help us do this, we've got these 6 themes on here, and that's helping us to focus on what we need to deliver to help you deliver your projects on the ground. So estuarine and coastal restoration strategy is about continuing getting our projects, ReMeMaRe and habitat restoration, into those environmental policies and strategies. Outreach and capacity building, that's engaging with the public, looking at how we can build the capacity. And then funding and finance, not just about looking about future funding sources, but also looking about how to embed into business planning. Monitoring and research and evidence is pretty straightforward, but it's making sure we've got the right data that you need and also that it's fully accessible. And enabling restoration, we're looking at those approaches to streamline regulation. And finally, that final one there, restoration in action, that's actual delivery on the ground so that we can meet our mission target. So I won't dwell on this too long, we haven't got much time. So this sets out what our current plan is for the next 5 years and how they all link in with those 6 themes. But just want to stress, this is by no means the final version, and we want to use the opportunity of you all being here today to come and talk to us at our ReMeMaRe stand just over there, so that you can tell us about what you need from ReMeMaRe and also how you can be involved and share your experiences to help the wider restoration community. Now, there are a lot of initiatives out there, and we're fully aware that your organisations and the partnerships you're involved in are really proud of what you do, and you've spent a lot of time and resources building your reputation and your brand. And we're also aware that there are lots of initiatives out there, and you can't be part of it all. But we sort of see ReMeMaRe as that helping hand. So we're trying to create a platform to provide you with the tool and the guidance and the support to give you the confidence to deliver your projects. So we can have ReMeMaRe with a national focus, and then we can filter that down at a local level to be able to deliver your work. So many of the stumbling blocks are related to the time it takes to deliver projects, and obviously we're trying to work out how we can streamline some of those processes before we even start our work. And then looking at building capacity, so training for future participants, but also how we can train the people we work alongside with as well. So that could be the planners or coastal engineers. Obviously providing that long-term funding, providing the right kind of data and making it more accessible. So in order for ReMeMaRe to work, we're really keen for your input. Whether you're part of the partnership or you'd like to sign up to the partnership or you're already involved. So please do come and find us. We've got a couple of boards there and some post-its. You can jot down your ideas, what you've been up to, what projects you've got planned, what information you need from us, what data, what help and support. So thanks very much. I'm really looking forward to hearing all about your work over the next couple of days. I do hope the conference and the future work of ReMeMaRe will inspire you to undertake more restoration, but also give you that confidence and support you need to deliver your work and make it a success. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo, and I should just give a big shout out for DEFRA Marine colleagues as well, because the Blue Carbon Project, which is supporting the funding of the Programme Office, and obviously our funding, grant and aid funding for Water Environment Improvement Fund is from DEFRA. Without the vision of policy colleagues in DEFRA Marine, we wouldn't have been possible to make the gains we've had over the last 12 months. So a big thank you to DEFRA Marine as well, who are obviously a big part of our partnership too. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our next speaker then, Duncan Vaughan. Duncan is the senior advisor for the Remedies project, which you may have heard about or been involved in, which has been a pivotal programme that is helping to inform, particularly on the seagrass front, but I'm sure there's lots of lessons to be learned from it. And I know it's coming to a bit of a turning point in terms of the project coming to an end, so there's lots that we can hopefully take from the programme, Duncan, and I'll leave you to explain a little bit more.
Right, let's get started. Slides not working quite right. Good morning, and welcome to what I'm sure is going to be a brilliant conference next couple of days. So in this Instagram world when everyone wants to show their best side, I want to do something a little bit different today. So bear with me. Okay, so every story has an introduction, and today I want to share a story with you. Now, every story can be considered to fit within one of seven kind of plots. I'm going to give you some classics as examples. Jaws, you all love that movie. It's Overcoming the Monster. Second plot, Groundhog Day. Comedy, 12th Night. Tragedy, Hamlet. Rags to Riches, Cinderella. Voyage and Return, Line of the Ancient Mariner. And finally, The Quest, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I want you to think about what kind of plot best fits the story I'm going to tell you today. And the story I want to share is that of the Remedies Seagrass Restoration Project. And at the start of this story for me is when I joined the project about 2 years ago, about halfway through. I took over from Roger Covey, and his initial words to me about the project were straightforward, no drama. So that's how he described the project to me, as he laughed pedalling off into retirement in the distance. And I get his photos from where he's around the world now. So what is Remedies? Remedies is the largest seagrass restoration project in the UK. It's a multi-year, multi-partner, multi-pound, multi-species project to protect and recover seagrass and merle across 5 protected sites in the south of England. So why tell the story? And like on Instagram, where everything is perfect, real life is really different. It's very different. It's very messy. We've made mistakes along the way, and things have gone wrong. But a key deliverable for the project is to share our learning and to help you to work through and avoid some of the challenges that we've faced. So first and foremost, we don't want to give you the false impression that restoration is easy, as it really isn't. Okay, episode 1, right. Let's start with licensing first, shall we? I'm sure others will touch on this subject over the next few days. At times, I thought it really shouldn't be this hard, it shouldn't be this time-consuming, and it shouldn't be this expensive. Even with regulators working really close together, licensing has not been easy. For many good reasons. We don't operate in a regulatory environment that supports a try and fail fast, and then change direction approach. This is super frustrating, I'm sure you're probably aware, when you're trying to aid nature recovery against the backdrop of climate change, of biodiversity crises, and then you're charged for doing it, and the privilege of doing it. It's frustrating. So key learning from the project was ensure that the project has got clarity on who is going to be responsible for providing information to support the securing of licenses and throughout the processes. And then, really critically, if you can, is try and build flex into a license so you don't have to go back and modify it, because this will take time and it may cost more. And that's really challenging when you're in time-bound projects. Okay, fake it until you make it. Hopefully, well, we might have seen cartoons where a dog is chasing a car and then the dog catches up with the car and then catches onto the bumper, bites it, and then thinks, right, got it, what now? Well, this project has felt like that at times. It's a super exciting and a really ambitious one, but it's also been really daunting. Yet as we've grappled with delivering what we initially set out we would do. Delivering 8 hectares of seagrass restoration over several years, it doesn't sound that stretching, but it's required resilience and almost a bloody-minded determination just to get it done. It's been super challenging. And there have been a fair few activities that we as a project have undertaken that are not new, but they're new to us. And so we've been feeling our way throughout the process. In a large part, we progressed by trying and learning, getting back up and then trying again. Now, I don't use the word failing here deliberately, because each time something hasn't worked, we've captured that learning, we've moved on, and we want to share that with you. Right. Okay. The ground. Restoration techniques don't necessarily work for many reasons in a particular location or when scaled up. That's tough to take when you as an individual are really invested in a project, and also the organisation is invested in it. In this project, Remedies, we tried multiple techniques, not because we wanted to, but because we had to. And this led to frustrations born from a desire to fast-track techniques and equipment, and that hitting the reality of licensing and assessments. Proving what works over a long time is going to be really difficult, especially so if the underlying pressures that are in the system are not removed. But it feels right, what we're doing, but is that good enough? We must be careful not to oversell restoration benefits as well. Okay. When working in the marine environment, things go wrong, and they go wrong really quickly. If you turn your back, the sea will quickly remind you who is boss. And when it does, the impulse is to react quickly, but quite often the correct action is just to slow down, take stock, and then act. Boats are not supposed to sink when they're using your nice new advanced mooring system. That's really bad. Unfortunately they do, and sometimes it's not the fault of the mooring. Have a plan for this eventuality. Also, if the boat's sitting on the bottom of the sea, it's not going anywhere fast. You don't need to rush in. we had a situation like this. We did on the project. We wanted to, quite rightly, to manage the reputational risk, but in doing so, we created other risks for the project. A key learning for us was about our competencies, and they lie in conservation advice, marine protection and conservation, not necessarily marine operations. So make sure on your project you've got that right skill set where you can access it quite quickly. When things go wrong, and they will go wrong when working at sea, be open, honest and quick to seek help. People will help you. A blame game suits nobody. Shell game. So I'm on about the game here where someone has 3 cups and then moves a ball around and you've got to guess under which cup the ball is in. Key to cracking the game is concentrating and not being distracted. We're working in 5 sites and 2 habitats, conducting active restoration, installing preventative measures in the form of advanced mooring systems and marker buoys, as well as conducting education activities. On a big project, there's a real danger of doing lots of things, but not necessarily all of them well. So my advice to those looking to try and replicate a project such as this is to really think about the scale of ambition, reality of delivery and corporate competences. Be ambitious, but also be realistic. Okay. Episode 6, the lover. When you're in a partnership, you need to be cognizant of your partner's motivations and needs, and these may differ between partners. You should expect that a project will come to an end, quite naturally, and that partners will actively seek to develop new opportunities. That may mean that partners are juggling multiple projects, and this can seem that mentally and practically they've moved on from your relationship. You should remember that this is actually normal, and it's expected. It should be expected. In fact, it should be a good thing, because it means that they want to take forward the work that you're doing and they want to work with others. We also need to recognise that people, as well as organisations, will move on, and this will cause a hole, and that might cause delays, confusion, angst in projects, but things will work out over time. I think we've had over 100 people working on the ReMeMaRe seagrass restoration project over about 4.5 years. That's a lot of change that we've had amongst those personnel. So each change in personnel results in a loss of knowledge, backfilling, inefficiencies, and diverts resources away from delivery. And particularly when projects come towards the end of their life, the drivers to move on for some individuals are greater, to change and to move on. You need to plan for that and provide contingency for this as best as you can. Just because we think we are right doesn't mean that others will agree with us. When the project was initiated, agreements were made, stating with boaters that if they wanted to swap their existing moorings for advanced mooring systems, we'll swap them back at the end of the project if they didn't like the new system. After all, who wouldn't want a nice brand new fancy mooring? What concerns me now as we kind of move towards the end of the project is whether we signed up to a commitment that we might struggle to keep. I really hope not. Because there is an argument that is it right to put back an old style mooring that we know to be damaging to a habitat that we're there supposed to be protecting? So that's quite challenging. So what do you do? In our case, we're trying to crack on with transfers of ownership and liability for the moorings, really to understand the risk that we as a project are exposed to. And once we've done that, then we'll work out where we go from there. So if you've worked hard to develop a project, gone through the process of securing funds and delivering high-profile and topical work, you may get offers of further money from other organisations coming out of the blue with sponsorship. That's great, right? The seemingly easy option is to take the money, but this brings in risks and challenges. Sponsors will expect something quite rightly in return, such as advertising, content from internal newsletters, etc. This means that time delivering the project may be diverted to meet the sponsor's needs. As a project manager, you need to be aware of a possible disconnect between your priorities and those of sponsors. It's therefore important before taking on sponsorship to consider if taking money actually adds value to the project, whether the sponsor is a good fit, whether you have the skills, the experience, the time to manage a sponsorship deal, and whether this will actually cause friction within a project. Who in the project, which of the partners should get the money, when, how much, how do you split it up? In fact, it's worth thinking about setting up some ground rules at the start of a project regarding sponsorship, because this may avoid awkward conversation down the line. Kevin Costner once said, build and they will come. That was certainly the case in the UK Seagrass Symposium. It was something I was proud to have played a small part in, and while not a remedies project, it was one that was really supported by the project. It was successful because it drew together people, that community, the community I see in front of me today. And I remember looking down from the gallery at the National Marine Aquarium where the symposium was held, just to see a sea of passionate people writing on maps where they were working and what they were doing, so that we could build up this picture of nationally of what's going on in seagrass restoration and facilitate collaborative working in the UK. In our projects, we were worried about long-term monitoring as well of the seagrass restoration projects. I think those fears are unjustified. Well, why? Well, I think if you could pick one place in the UK to conduct restoration work, I think a place where you can see the National Marine Aquarium, Ocean Conservation Trust, Plymouth University and the MBA from that location, that's probably not a bad place to start. People will survey and monitor that restoration site in Plymouth Sound over the next decade a lot. So I think my time is almost up, so like all stories, there must be an ending. The Remedies project ends in October at a conference at National Marine Aquarium. Hopefully I will get to see you there. And like successful movies, there are often franchises and sequels. And in the Remedies project, we're developing an afterlife project setting out how we can embed learning from the project. I touched on the Seagrass Symposium a moment ago. The second Seagrass Symposium is going to be held in 2025. So I think post-Remedies, seagrass restoration in the UK is in really good hands. So how does this Remedies story pan out? In terms of the project, we'll actually know in the next few months. But it will take years, I think, for the story of seagrass restoration in the UK to become clear. So I guess the plot for the story is that of a quest. Okay. There's been a massive team behind the Remedies project. Lots of inspirational, super passionate people trying to do difficult things in a difficult environment. Some of them are here, which I'm proud to work with them. So it's been a privilege to work on the project with them to protect and recover our seas, and also to speak here to you today to share some of our learning. So thank you very much for your time. I think we might have some time for questions, or maybe not.
Thanks, Duncan. Yeah, we haven't got time for questions, unfortunately, but obviously Duncan and I and Joe are going to be around for the whole conference, so feel free to come up if any of those, any of the points we've made have triggered a spark or whatever, and feel free to follow up with an email as well if there's anything you want to query us about, and look forward to seeing all the shared learning, Duncan, that can come out of the Remedies programme, because there's clearly a lot behind those headlines, so looking forward to that, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot in the partnership. So we'll move on. The next session, I think you provide a nice segue to the next session as well, about what is it the business needs in terms of confidence around restoration. So I'll let Dave Tudor come up to the stage now and hand the baton over, and I'll let Dave introduce himself for the next session.
Thank you, Roger. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. It's wonderful to see you all at this ReMeMaRe conference in Scarborough once again. We've got 5 excellent presentations coming up on investing in restoration. My name is David Tudor, so I'm going to be up here this morning. So just to give you a bit of an explanation what this session is trying to achieve here. So securing funding, as we all know, really, as you've heard this morning, is one of the main challenges to restoration. To feel confident about putting their money into estuarine and coastal restorations, what do investors need to see? What do they want? So we're going to hear today about what investments have paid off, what made those projects attractive. So you'll hear from speakers who can help us answer some of these questions for investors. So just before we start, I think Roger mentioned earlier around questions. So we have Slido, there's a QR code which you've seen, which you can see. And that QR code really is for you to lodge your questions. The speakers will be asked to take them away and answer them, and the ReMeMaRe team and the EA will collect that. So when we have our Q&A, we'll all sit over there, the speakers, at the end of all, once everyone's spoken, and I'll take questions from the floor. But please do put it into Slido as well, please. So, as many of you know, Aviva have been putting a lot of money and investing in restoration. So the organisers are really delighted to have Aviva here today to really start off this session. And we have Henrietta Stock, who's going to start us off from Aviva. So can I welcome you to the stage, Henrietta? Thank you, Henrietta. That was really interesting, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions for you later. One thing we should have mentioned is that we have a resident artist here today. So John Elson, who is over in the back there, is waving. See John. So he's going to be interpreting the messages throughout the day and the speakers and what's been said. And he's going to be displaying his work out there, I believe. So something different. So that's really interesting. Now back to the discussions and the presentation. So those of you here last year will have seen Wave Crookes present right at the beginning of the ReMeMaRe conference last year. So he's back here again to talk about a very local project, Seagrown. And he's also joined by his colleague Laura Robinson. So Laura, Wave, over to you.
Thank you very much. So let's see if we can get this button working. All right.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Scarborough, where the sun always shines and where Seagrown is based. Related to for the price of one this morning. My name's Wave. Thanks for the introduction, David. And we've also got Laura with us. A few years ago, I was driving a big red ship round in Antarctica for the British Antarctic Survey. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah, we're all right. The scientists used to turn up on a regular basis, and here is Professor Laura Robinson, who was one of those scientists. That is how we met, and that is how Seagrown was born. We just happened to be based in Scarborough for the convenience of the ReMeMaRe conference.
Great, so my name is Laura Robinson. I work at Seagrown, and I'm also a Professor of Climate, Oceans and Society at the University of York, so I bring a big, strong academic background to our company as well. We really like this quote from a paper in 2012. If seaweed was growing over just 9% of the oceans, it could remove all of the human-produced carbon in the atmosphere, replace all of our fossil fuels, and sustain increased fish production to help feed our growing population. That's pretty inspiring, right? We're a really ambitious, small company, and this would be a great ambition. We can't do it on our own, so a lot of the innovation we're talking about, we want to use to help other people take part in this journey to climate mitigation. So we've heard about 3 C's, we came up with 5 C's. So we've got 5 C's for successful ocean health solution through kelp aquaculture. We're going to talk about the challenges that we've faced, talk about a comprehensive solution that we think we have produced, capability, collaboration, which is really important, we've heard a lot about, and of course a cohesive team. So many challenges, it's pretty hard to know where to start. We've already heard a couple in the short time we've had at the conference already. Licensing is difficult. We're not talking about that much, and we work really well with the regulators, but it is difficult. Finance, that's what this session's about. This stuff is expensive. There's capital, there's people, there's a lot of time. We put little example images here of boats, something that we've faced a lot. If you get a chance to come and visit us while you're here in Scarborough, over in the harbour, you'll see our 2 boats. They don't look like this anymore, but when we bought them, they looked terrible. We had to put a huge effort into building seaweed vessels, something that doesn't really exist. finding the right people and bringing them to Scarborough. A real success of our company is building skilled jobs in a small deprived coastal town. And of course, what we're here to really talk about is growing seaweed. That's also a challenge. So it's no secret that seaweed is one of the most exciting nature-based solutions for ocean restoration. It has huge rapid growth, there's a huge production potential. Sorry, I've got very focal glasses, so looking down at this, it's really hard. It takes up a huge amount of carbon. There's a massive potential for water quality improvement, biodiversity net gain, which a lot of us are interested in, and actually, if we're talking about finance, there's a huge market potential for seaweed aquaculture as it brings these ocean health benefits. So it's not the potential of seaweed is the challenge we face, it's really the way that seaweed is being grown today.
I'll pick up on this bit. The way that seaweed is being grown today, almost exclusively, 99.9%, is using this long-line seaweed farming system. A lot of people in the room may be familiar with it, but it's a big long piece of string with seaweed seed on, suspended at the right depth in the water. Top right photograph there is a farm in Asia. You can see that there's an awful lot of kit, danglers, buoys, anchors and clankers all over the place in there. An awful lot of kit in the water makes it expensive, makes it very labour intensive and arguably difficult for certain areas of the world. It needs to be in sheltered water. If you put that lot where we put our farm, which is 4 miles behind you, all out to seaward, bad things happen. And that bad thing is the bottom right photograph there. We tried long-line farming like this when we first started several years, well, no, about 5 years ago actually, and it didn't work. It just does not work in the offshore setting. It turns into a hard heap of stuff you've got to grapnel from the seabed. And I tell you that from bitter experience. These inshore waters are crowded. They're not just crowded here, in fact we're lucky here. But in other areas of the world they're crowded with recreational traffic, traffic for commercial ports, they're crowded with fishing activity, any number of things that need to go on in the same patch of water, and you can't put anything else in a seaweed farm that looks like that. Clearly the potential for wildlife entanglement is high with all that equipment in the water. Impossible to completely eliminate that, I'm afraid, but we can greatly reduce it to the minimum level possible. Can't co-locate this form of seaweed farming with other activities, or it's incredibly difficult to do so, and it would also be difficult because of its impact on the seabed to use it in sensitive areas as we've listed there. So that leads to a lack of social licence, and we are seeing that at the moment. Some of you may be familiar with the southwest of England. There's several applications being contested for large-scale seaweed farms in Cornwall and Devon. We have seen this personally on our travels, and there's a lot of community unrest against these because, as it says on that mussel buoy, chained to that lamppost in Gerrans, do you want 9,500 of these buoys in your bay? If you don't, you've got to contact the MMO and object. And I know that the MMO have a lot of objections about these particular developments. So it's clear that we need to think differently. Growing seaweed is good. Not all the ways of growing it are particularly good, but we've got to do this differently. Otherwise, the seaweed industry is going to end up dead in the water, as it says there. We've got to make sure we use it as a tool to fight the planet's problems in the most effective way. So we developed a new solution, which we'll tell you very briefly about. That solution is called Calpedo, as it says there. More detail at the back on our stand. But it's literally seaweed aquaculture reinvented. We've had to do this, very much like Duncan's project. If it doesn't work, we do it again, do it differently. Make it work, move the problem, get round the problem. And that's what we've done. Our solution now takes away all those can'ts about long lines. You can now work offshore, we are doing right now, and you can also work inshore at scale if that's what you need. We can work with other marine industries. We're demonstrating that across various sectors, including fishing very soon, we hope. You can use all sizes of workboat. You don't need a boat our size. You can do everything from a small fishing vessel up to a large offshore construction vessel. It's got to be versatile. You can grow seaweed sustainably all year round. We're very proud about the fact that we can make this start to finish right here on the Yorkshire coast using our people.
So back to one of our C's, capability. So Calpedo gives us a fantastic capability now. We can contribute to biodiversity net gain, and we're working on monitoring that and developing the methods. nutrient uptake, carbon uptake, water quality improvement, habitat restoration, and we're moving towards IMTA, bringing shellfish into the system. And really importantly, Wave talked about the benefit of what we've been developing, but one of the true benefits is we can bring all of those capabilities into targeted areas where we actually have problems or where we might want to do restoration. So it's a really important part of the design of what we've been up to, is really being able to target the solution and the capability to where we really need it.
Another C, I can't remember how many C's we've had now, but this is the latest one, cohesive team. We've got one of those. We have created 23 jobs in this deprived local area, coastal area. No reason why this can't be done in any other coastal area. Another 23 and another 23. We've got a great team. We've got two of them at the back. I can't see where they are at the moment. Somewhere over there. There he is. That'll be Hong Chin, who's our science manager, Dr. Hong Chin, and we've got Joe Holborn, our general manager as well. We've got photos here of the science and marine team at sea. They're at sea a lot, especially at this time of year. Doing their sciencey and marine things. That is not Scrappy Challenge, top middle. It looks like it, but it's when we were refitting our vessel Southern Star up in the Isle of Bute several years ago. Marine observations are done all the time at sea. There's Imogen with her binoculars, and Hong Chin, who as I said is at the back there, is out regularly with his white wellies and his white specs, harvesting or getting seed material from the rocks in this local area. Bottom left is a personal favourite of mine. That was just coming out of the COVID lockdown. Not only have we reinvented the ship, we had to start using made seawater, using salt and water mixed up to make it right because we couldn't access clean seawater. In the cargo hold of Southern Star using domestic water tanks. That was the start of our now state-of-the-art hatchery system, but we've come an awful long way since then.
So we're right in our last minute, and we've got to whiz through a couple more slides. I'll do it super fast. Collaboration's been really, really important. A couple of things we've done we're really proud of. We're working with the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust on a programme called Wild Eye, which brings loads of people from the local area and beyond to find out what we're doing. In fact, our ship's going to be open later today and tomorrow if you want to come and find out more, but we do loads of events with local people about nature and inspiring people to get involved. We also, of course, work with wider agencies. We've noted a couple of here. We bring students on board to learn about the area. We've worked really closely with DESNES, who are supporting a lot of the innovation work to get marine-based biomass into our sort of carbon mitigation. Work with the Carbon Trust on the best ways to use seaweed for carbon. And we're working now in the ecosystem assessment programme that we've heard a lot about with the Environment Agency to look at the natural capital that's associated with seaweed farming in Calpedo in particular. We're really looking forward to that piece of work which we kicked off yesterday.
So, quick question, could it help, could Calpedo and the barriers to seaweed as an nature-based solution? Yes, it can, absolutely. That's how it's going to do it. We're going to skip through this because I know that we'll be in trouble from Hannah any second now. But yeah, we're going to do all these things if we're given the chance to do so. Most interestingly, I think diversifying the fishing industry into this is going to be a key factor for marine biomass and ecosystem services.
So we'll leave you with that. And what's next for Seagrown? Well, we're going after that 9%. We want to do some good and have an impact. That's what we're here for. So any of you want to get involved in this journey with us, we'd be really happy to chat to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Wave. Thank you, Laura. Brilliant. So now we're going north of the border. There's been a lot of discussion and a lot of talk in England about a marine recovery fund. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about the emerging Marine Camry Fund in Wales. But in Scotland, they've been doing it for a long time. They're doing it for over 3 years. The Scottish Marine Environmental Enhancement Fund, SMEEF. So here to tell us more about SMEEF is Sarah Brown. Sarah.
Yeah, the longest title in the room. We've been doing this for 4 years now, and the Scottish Marine Environmental Enhancement Fund, no matter how quickly you say it, is still definitely the longest title. Thank you very much for having me to speak. I hope I can give you a whiz through what we've been doing, how we've been doing it, and some of the challenges that we've been facing. We are a partnership, so I sit within Nature Scot, but we have behind us, we call them the triumvirate, Scottish Government's Marine Directorate, Crown Estate Scotland and Nature Scot. So we've got access to some of the best brains in the business, I like to think. So I stand on the shoulders of giants very definitely when I'm doing this. So, I thought that was up already. There we go. From ambition to reality. So going back to 2018, 2019, whenever industry and policy were sort of sitting together for the first time and saying, how are we going to bring this together and make a pot of money that could be spent responsibly and deliver impacts for the marine environment in Scottish coasts and seas. I was brought in 2020 and we started working on what that structure was going to look like. And it took about 18 months of development, and I have to say, I think I'm not a marine biologist, I'm a geologist by training, and people say, well, why did you get this job? And I would say, well, brass neck and sharp elbows are definitely required if you want to make progress in this area. It's quite challenging. But we are now 2 years into delivery. We have got £3.8 million worth of grants out. We've got 54 projects in the sea, on the coast, actually doing things. And we are working on our kind of delivery, on our monitoring approach and discussing and presenting how we talking about how we describe what we do and how we actually monitor what we do. Our first and second impact reports have just been published. So our second impact report went out on Monday and got great coverage. I can't believe we're actually in the Times. And somebody said, was that the Open Times? Like, no, actually the Times. So we're catching some eyes and people are starting to see the work that we've been doing. We have £2.1 million. We think it's the largest ever donation to marine restoration in Scottish coasts and seas. And that's going to go directly into seagrass restoration. So we've got a great challenge on our hands of 14 hectares that we need to plant over the next 3 years. We're always open for more donations, but with that comes a lot of challenges. So how do we do this? How do we have a decision-making structure that reflects the needs of bringing money in a good way? Effectively what it is risk management. We need to deal with the reality of accusations of greenwashing, and how we do that is we separate the money from influence. So the money comes in, we have an ethical contributions board that assesses that. We have a very robust due diligence process, and I can go through that in more detail if you're interested. And the ethical contributions board makes a recommendation to the steering group then make that ultimate decision. But of course we're talking about risk to Scottish Government, Nature Scot, and Crown Estate Scotland. So those are big reputational risks that we need to manage on a daily basis. But it's not only that, it's the risk to the grantees who are accepting this money. How are they going to feel about where that money is coming from and how we manage it? So effectively, our ethical guidance, we've got quite a robust ethical guidance network behind all of this, and it's evolving as we have been working through these grant-giving processes. But it's built around environmental impact of the companies that are giving the donations, the reputational risk that would come to the organisations behind SMEEF, but also the work that those companies are doing, particularly on just transition as they operate in our coasts and seas. So where has all this money been coming from? Just in case you were thinking on the ACE fundraiser, 3.8 million, I just whipped out my back pocket. Love to say I did. But actually, to start with, an awful lot of our money, the seed money came from the offshore wind industry, and then an awful lot of our money has come from the Nature Restoration Fund, which is absolutely brilliant pipeline of public funding that has come through SMEEF and allowed us to get a lot of stuff up and running. But you see there, as we're progressing, we are moving away from that public funding and into almost 100% private funding. Now, this year we've got 1.5 million in the pot already, and you can see that that graph decreases. I'm hoping that high level can be maintained. I think we have a spending profile of somewhere between 5 and 10 million, an appetite for that kind of money every year. I'm hoping that's where my ambition sits. So what do we deliver with all of this? So we have our strategic fundraiser, our strategic grant giving goes across 5 themes, and very roughly they are research, so that's the baseline survey and getting the data in and making sure that the grants are going in the right places and that we're filling in some of those data gaps. You've got seabed, encompasses a world of choices, but effectively it's the kind of seagrass and the native oyster restoration and that kind of stuff. We've got coastal work, so we've done some work on sand dune restoration for biodiversity benefit. We've done some work on salt marsh. We've done work on looking at methane analysis of coastal environments, that kind of thing. Going through to, press the button, there we go, mobile and marine species. So this is our wider seas work. Largely that has been for things like cetacean entanglement. I know Sam's are here today. We've done some work with them. But also working with the Scottish Marine Animal Stranding Scheme to increase their capability to deal with cetacean strandings and to analyse what's happening in the broader marine environment. And seabirds, of course. I do love a tern raft. If anybody's interested in a tern raft, I'm a sucker for a tern raft. Build it and they will come. I do firmly believe in that. Policy alignment is hugely important, and this is something that our donors are very interested in. We make sure that we are aligned as much as possible, and you'll see in our latest impact report how we've tried to report against that. There are some high-level indicators within the emerging strategies. We're still waiting for the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy, Seabird Strategy and so on to be published. But we've tried our best to pull out the key themes from those and to publish them. So why do businesses donate? What is it about SMEEF that is encouraging them to come to us? It is a little bit, again, build it and they'll come. It is corporate social responsibility. It is environment, social and governance. So it's those kind of things. But it's also for us that we see businesses who want to test how enhancement can be done ahead of the compulsory measures that are coming in down the line. So we are very much a test. I think somebody said earlier on, we don't talk about failure, but when things fall over, we want to be the people who are pushing ourselves in to make sure that we are testing those new approaches to doing marine enhancement and then learning from it and then getting that information back out there. So there's a lot of different reasons why business will come to us. We also offer that kind of strategic insight, that strategic alignment with government that helps companies know that they are giving to a place that's going to be 100% transparent. And in fairness, they also are very nervous in this position. We all heard the stories about Baillie Gifford and various others that have had to withdraw from their donations to charitable aims. We provide that clearinghouse, if you like, to make sure that they can come to us, they can still contribute, and they still will get some recognition and they will get a lot of feedback from us, but they will not be aligned with any one particular project. Transparency and accountability is always chasing me. I kind of constantly, every time I send an email or have a thought or save anything to a database, I think somebody's going to ask me a freedom of information request. So we are thinking transparency all the time. And that's really important to our donors because they know that they can come to us and they can ask any question. It's the same thing for our grantees. So our aim is to maximise the amount of money out there. We are building, making a bigger cake, if you like. So what we do, if somebody comes to us and say, I just want to fund something in the Firth of Forth and I just want to do seagrass in that particular place, we'll say, great, there's already a seagrass programme there, you go and talk to them. What we want to do is to build that bigger pot and make sure that we can fund across Scottish coasts and seas. And maximise donation and create the highest integrity. Like I say, we've got quite an extensive due diligence process. Our extended due diligence looks back further than 5 years and goes deep into the kind of scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions and the just transition claims that people are making. So I have about a minute left just to toot our own horn and say that if you have a look on our website, you can learn more about this award-winning programme. And you can also have a look at our restoration toolkit. We're talking a lot about licensing, and one of the things we've tried to do is to collate a lot of information into our restoration toolkit so that communities can get in there and in kind of layman's terms, it takes me to write these things because I am a layperson myself, to talk about how do you go about licensing, what kind of restoration opportunities are right for me, beyond native oysters, what else can we do, and that kind of thing. We have a webinar at the end of the month about our seagrass fund, and I would also encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. Just send Vassie info@smeef.scot and you can get onto our newsletter mailing list. I do want to say a massive thank you to all of our donors. We really couldn't do it without them. I know that sounds very trite, but the enthusiasm, the openness, the constructive way that these people are working with us has been absolutely brilliant. From companies like Ørsted to SSEN and all the way across the board, We just have a very constructive relationship with the industry. Our job now, this is the offshore wind industry, our job now is to make sure that we reach out to the insurance sector, to the supermarkets, to the supply chain to all of these industries, to ports and harbours, to anybody. If there are any high net worth individuals in the room, I'm open for discussion over coffee. So please do come and talk to us and find out more, and I'll be delighted to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Award-winning Sarah Brandon, thank you very much, Sarah. Next we have a presentation from the Crown Estate. Clearly an increasingly pivotal organisation in marine restoration agenda. They've just released a report on high integrity marine natural capital, and here to talk to you about it today is Caroline Price. Caroline.
Good morning, everyone. I feel hats off to the organisers who arranged the order of the talks this morning, because it's all teed up perfectly to what I'm going to share with you today. And of course I am here representing the Crown Estate, who I work for, but I should say from the top, a bit like many of my colleagues who have spoken this morning, I'm really representing a coalition of experts, many of whom are in the room today, who worked hard on this piece that I'm going to talk a little bit about. So, I'll kick off with a just 30-second overview of the Crown Estate, just for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, or that don't know who we are or what we do. So a bit like the Crown Estate Scotland that Sarah spoke about earlier, we're the rest of the UK equivalent of that organisation, and we operate for and on behalf of the nation to essentially look after and steward a wide range of assets on land and at sea. We're established under an Act of Parliament, and 100% of our net profit goes back to Treasury, and so we provide quite an important income stream to the government to do all sorts of things that are important for us folks that live in this wonderful country. I sit in the marine team, as you would expect, but colleagues elsewhere across the business look after our assets from Windscrape Park through central London. We have ownership of agricultural land in lots of different places, really wonderful area of Welsh Commons, and we also look after a range of activities within that that helps to think about regional development very close to communities around the country. I just wanted to share this slide also because I think although lots of people in the room will work with me and my team and the Nature and Environment team in the Marine Park of the Crown Estate, I wanted to just set the operations that we look after in the context of the broader marine business, just to give you an idea of the network of customers and stakeholders and organisations that we have the opportunity to work with, which can be incredibly powerful when you're thinking about complex activities like restoration. I also wanted to pull through these strategic priorities that we have as an organisation, because I think it helps to answer that question that some people pose to me, which is, why does the Crown Estate get involved at all in restoration of ecosystems? Well, here's why. We have these very clear strategic objectives that we're working to deliver, often and if not always in partnership with others. So, to the topic of my talk then, which is about how do we unlock investment in a massive scale to accelerate restoration that we're all working hard on. You've heard from others this morning about how tricky that is, and you've also heard about some of the progress that's already being made, and I'm going to try and pull some of those strands together, which is exactly what the initiative around the roadmap was seeking to do. The funding gap for nature is quite well documented now, but I think one of the things I wanted to bring into the context of this talk was about, we are starting to see that trajectory of change around investment in nature-based solutions, but most of that so far has been happening in terrestrial activities, which is exactly what this graph here shows. And in the UK, there's been lots of really fantastic work happening at policy across all the different nations to think about how do you build the governance and the frameworks to really unlock some of those natural capital markets or nature markets to really bring that private finance into this space and try and plug some of that funding gap. We're doing this in slightly different ways across the UK, which is absolutely what you would expect in a nation that thinks differently and wants to replicate what's important for all of their populations in a more contextual way. But bringing those together to bring forward the high integrity frameworks piece, which Sarah articulated beautifully in terms of the work that she's been doing with SMEEF, is really, really key. So I think that because of the progress that's happened, not just in the UK but globally around particularly that terrestrial investment, we're at a really interesting time in the UK to think about how we really set those frameworks for high integrity outcomes in the marine and coastal space. We can learn a lot of good lessons about what's worked really well, but we can also have a look at some of the stuff that hasn't worked so well and think about how we can do things differently to try and drive forward things in the right way. So we came together with organisations, the Marine Foundation, Finance Earth and Pollination initially to do an initial phase 1 piece of work, which basically looked to pull together the progress so far. What does the landscape look like? What have we done? Where are we at? What are the barriers? What have we learned so far? Who's working on this? And why haven't we made more progress? So that work happened to pull together what we called a synthesis report, and we had a really excellent workshop which put together a diverse range of stakeholders to help us think about that and pull it together. One of the unique things about this piece of work is that we really tried to think about who needed to be in that room. So obviously our science experts, our academic colleagues and our policy colleagues, but also critically, how do you bring into that room also the finance sector, the investors, the people who are going to need to be able to answer to their investors in terms of the transparency of where that money is going, what it's achieving, Henrietta and her colleagues. But also I think policy too, because often when I'm talking to my research colleagues, their biggest challenge is how do we make that connection between the research that we're doing and the translation into policy in a helpful way that can drive the change that we all need to see. So through this synthesis report, which hopefully many of you have seen, but if not, still available online, we really pulled out these kind of key barriers and we kind of categorised them in the way that you can see on the screen. It was a really useful conversation because I think lots of us are aware of these barriers, but we all kind of come against them in very nuanced ways. So what we tried to do with this report is kind of consolidate it a little bit and have some overarching themes that made sense to all those different people in the room. And then we had to think about solutions because, that was the whole point of the piece of work. And the report pulls together what is quite a long list, in all fairness, in terms of those barriers and then potential solutions. Doesn't go anywhere near trying to make recommendations or selections about which are the right ones, but kind of just sets them all out for folk to think about. And the whole purpose behind that initial stage was to essentially tee us up for the second stage, which was to do a bit more of that thinking. It's not working. Okay. So then this teed us up beautifully, as I was saying, for the second phase. And I was so delighted that because of how well the first phase had gone, we had other folk coming to the table to really help us strengthen and broaden the focus of the piece of work that we were doing to make sure that it could really be accessible and have value to the broad community of folk that are involved in both the nature markets and the restoration practitioner space. So SMEEF Fairbairn joined us, the University of Portsmouth got involved with their brilliant programme around restoration, and also Crown Estate Scotland, which meant that we could really think about this from a UK-wide perspective. And the purpose of the second phase was to do exactly what's on the screen, was to kind of do further analysis in some of those challenges that had come through in the early discussion, think about what the best solutions could be and recommendations that kind of bring together a more cohesive and shorter list of potential solutions that we could get behind and work together on. Really think about the different lenses that are relevant within the UK context. What needs to be right for Wales, what needs to be right for Northern Ireland, what needs to be right for Scotland that's potentially not the same for England. And then taking account of that uniqueness of the different nations, what then can come together and be the same across the whole of the UK that can help really drive up those standards and the high integrity frameworks that we can all work within. And we also wanted to really bring out some of those really strong lessons from the international landscape and shine a light on some of the brilliant projects that are already underway. So we ran a series of workshops, as I say, and we had a phenomenal engagement. Many of you are in the room today, and my thanks from all of us on the project team for your engagement. Honestly, when you start out with a piece of work, a bit like Duncan was saying, you have an idea of kind of how it's going to go, and you really hope it's going to be brilliant. I was completely bowled over by the level of engagement and enthusiasm and input that we had from the communities, from policy, finance, academia, research, restoration practitioners, NGOs. I feel like almost everybody kind of came into one of these workshops or shared their feedback, through one-to-one interviews or discussions. And the quality of the output, I think, really reflects that level of depth and expertise and diversity of views that fed into the piece of work that we did. So my thanks. And the UK steering group that we put together to try and help bring that structure and credibility and careful policy thinking overlay into that. Again, delighted that we really genuinely had UK representation in that space, which was a real strength. And so we published the roadmap. And it's a really fab, glossy, engaging, accessible report. If you haven't had a chance to see it yet, I encourage you to have a look. It's available online, obviously, as a digital copy, but we also have a number of hard copies with us today if you would like to have a wee little A5 version to take home with you at the back of the room. What it does is it distilled down those recommendations. So we've now got 7. Again, no priority is assigned to any of those 7. Just really a reflection of the key next steps that we need to take as a collective to take forward our journey towards high integrity natural capital markets. And under each of those recommendations, a breakdown of steps that can be taken, anticipated timeframes, and critically, organisations or groups of organisations that should be leading in that space, so that we can try and avoid duplication and come together and work on something in a continually progressive way and try and avoid duplication, which I know is the bugbear of many of my colleagues in this room. There's a very lovely visualisation of the roadmap that you can have a look at too, and there's a hard copy of that at the back. It's worth a read, and my hat's off to the visualisation team that put that together. Not an easy task. So what next? I'll leave you with my final slide. We want to make sure that this fantastic work continues, that coalition of the willing, that collaborative spirit that folk really brought to the table is so critical to the success, as you've heard Roger talk about, to the wider scaling of restoration. We're keen to make sure that we help continue to push things forward and bring everybody into that forum that wants to be a part of that journey. We're trying to think clearly about how we can kind of demonstrate progress, how we can report or feed into some of the wider initiatives that are going to kind of keep everybody aware, keep everybody aware of the progress that's being made, and try and make sure we continue to shine a light on those real champions of progress who we've been working with. If you want to know more about the work, do come and talk to me, my colleagues at Blue, the University of Portsmouth. I think there's probably a representative from every partner in the room today. We'd love to talk to you and tell you more about the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, for taking us through that fascinating piece of work. So now we have our final presentation of this session from Peter Barham. Peter's had a long career working in government agencies and marine industries, and he's chair of the Sea User and Developers Group. And Peter's here today to talk to us about net gain. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, David. I think the speakers this morning have already said what I wanted to say, so I could just stop there. I have to say, inspirational talks, from Henrietta and Sarah, the opportunities for restoration are going to come from industry. That's going to be the key point of my talk this morning. Do I have to point this thing? No, okay. So, I want to just set out a few points from SUDG. If you don't know what SUDG is, Seaweed User Developer Group, it's a bringing together, coming together of some of the key marine industries. I won't say any more, Google it, Google SUDG. But the simple fact is that there are 2 undeniable facts. They're not for debate. There is a climate crisis and there is a biodiversity crisis. I don't care what Trump says. We need to address both. And as has already been said, and as I'll go on to say, marine industries make a significant difference to the UK economy. Currently updating our socio-economic report, it will show that there's an order of about 1 million jobs associated with marine industries. That's a big lump of GDP, or whatever you measure it these days. There's already been mention of offshore wind a few times, significant moves about meeting our targets of net zero. And here's the biggie, that's maybe clear by yourselves, fantastic. The opportunity to assist recovery from industry is enormous. So, current situation, marine industries have universally welcomed net gain. Please remember that if you're not part of industry. Marine industries, we have huge experience in delivering environmental solutions. But this is a really important point. There is environmental legislation that protects the environment, quite rightly so. I spoke to government many times and have said, do not reduce the power of that legislation. We're hearing Labour government talk about, easing planning. Easing planning will not come about by reducing environmental protection. That's something which we've all got to fight for. But what we do need to do is make sure we truly distinguish between legislation that protects the environment and legislation, net gain, etc., that is going to improve the environment. That distinction is critical, and I have to say it's not happening yet. If we can do that, net gain becomes a real opportunity, but obviously the regulation should be proportionate and should be targeted. How many times have we heard the words integrate, high integrity this morning? The need for not delivering greenwash. We need to see real targets. I'll say a bit more about that shortly. But where are we at the moment? Biodiversity net gain is now, as you know, a statutory obligation. It started in February. I'm not going to beat about the bush. It is an incredibly complex metric. DEFRA's own guidance says it's so complex you'll probably need to employ, no, it doesn't mean probably, it says you will need to employ a consultant to help you deliver your net gain obligations. That's not simple. It should have been simple. It's very early days, we've got very little experience, but we need to share experience and good practice. And importantly, and again it's been stressed this morning, we need innovation, not bureaucracy, if we're going to make net gain work and if we're going to really contribute to restoration. So that's biodiversity net gain. Marine net gain, we know the policy is still being developed by DEFRA. We're working with DEFRA, as are many other bodies. There's currently work out there which Dick and Hal and this lot are looking at with possible frameworks for assessment, which I think could be really good. A lot of trust in Dick and his team, so that could be really, really useful work. But they're also looking at some of the economic aspects, the opportunities, and there's no figure as such, but try and work out for yourselves if there's 30 years of construction of offshore wind and associated infrastructure, there's a lot of money going to be available for net gain, and that money is going to be significant, and it's going to be potentially a massive opportunity for restoration. Let's not lose that. Let's not lose that. And one of the ways I think of not losing that is by having agreed targets. So, I spoke about this last year, so I'll be brief. Following early work on what net gain could look like, Joan Edwards of the Wildlife Trust and myself got together and said what we really need to do is identify some strategic targets for net gain. If we could identify targets which everybody could sign up to and agree, then that really should be the sort of driver for developing policy accordingly. So with the really great help from OWEC, the Offshore Wind Evidence for Change Programme, we got some funding to set up a task and finish group, and we specifically said it needs to be a task and finish group. This is a task, let's get on with it, let's do the work, let's write the report, let's finish. And that's exactly what we did. And as it says on the slide, it wasn't just SEDG, it was RSPB, Wildlife Trust, Natural England. DEFRA were extremely helpful in making sure that the work we did sort of linked and aligned with developing policy. And Laura Holland's here somewhere today, so I can talk to her. And the outputs that came from that work, which I should say, a lot of work was done by ABP-MER, who did it really well, through calls of evidence and things. But what we ended up with was a set of widely agreed targets. And that was really important, because if everybody can agree those targets, then it makes it much more easy to try and find policies which are going to help deliver those targets. That's what our hope was, and I think that's where we succeeded. Again, through OWEC funding, we got some further money to look at what experience exists already on restoration activity and how that might help us determine how some of these strategic targets could be delivered. And again, as a task and finish group, we sat together, we worked, ABP-MER did a lot of work, and we produced again a really useful report on what's actually happening and how the experience from that could help some of the projects. We've currently got a further bidding with OWEC, really to say, can we look at how some of these things can be delivered at the local level, if you like, pilot studies. I can't tell you whether we've got the money yet or not, because I don't know, but OWEC, the Offshore Wind Evidence Change Programme, is an incredibly, I think it's one of the most powerful and important initiatives in marine management at the moment, in making sure that what we do with the marine environment, really takes into account potential environmental impacts and resolves them. It's a big fund, and I'm not here to talk about OWEC, but if we can get this bit of money from OWEC, we will be able to do some local pilot studies. We agreed unanimously if we couldn't do that, we'd focus on the East Marine area, because currently the MMO are reviewing that plan. And there's quite a lot going on in that area, as already been pointed out in some of the slides. So, that's a quick flash through where we are. This is where we are now. Let's not get it wrong. Marine industries support net gain. Let's see net gain maintained as a positive support. I think the point you were making, Sarah, about, this is Ørsted, etc., putting money in, kick-started with public funding, pump-primed, if you like, but it's after that, it's industry. We've got to keep that atmosphere, that environment for industry positive and beneficial. What I've been increasingly saying to people is let's not see net gain as a development tax, but as a real opportunity. And that's what I urge all of you to do if you're involved in this net gain. There are huge financial opportunities. Greenwash has been mentioned again and again this morning. I don't need to say more about that. We've got to avoid greenwash. We've got to see innovation. We've got to see, I think the phrase you used, Henrietta, we've got to see investment allowed to de-risk. If industries don't spend money on something, it's got to understand and manage the risks, but it's also got to see activities which de-risk that. And therefore, I would really strongly urge whoever it was to say that we really, I think it was Joe Ratcliffe who said we need to see streamlining regulation, not reducing environmental protection, but really starting to make life easier for everybody. Better to collaborate rather than make it bureaucracy, partnership working, don't you say more. My final slide. SUDG industries are critical to marine and the UK economies. There's no doubt about that. The environment needs protecting, but it also needs restoring. Absolutely accepted. Industry can help, not just through protecting the environment, but through net gain and through the delivery of agreed targets, which, as I said, we signed up to. So we need to use those targets to direct the delivery of net gain. We need actions for conservation, not complex regulation. That's been said this morning. And of course, we need bodies like ReMeMaRe to help pull some of this stuff together. And at that point, I'll finish. Thank you.
Roving microphones, one there and one there. So, if you could please put your hand up. Can I ask you really to be quite succinct into your question? We want to get through as many as we can in about half an hour. I don't really want any comments, if you don't mind, just some questions. Say who you are and perhaps who you're directing your question to, or if it's to the whole panel. So, who would like to start us off with the first question? Right at the front here, please. Hannah, thank you.
Thanks for those really interesting, insightful talks on funding in restoration. A question for all of you, really. How do we shift the thinking behind funding in marine restoration to encompass the full definition of ecological restoration, which is about the recovery of degraded systems and the threats behind that, and not just about planting of new habitat?
Thank you. Who would like to answer that? You don't have to all answer it if you want. Peter, would you like to start? Oh, Peter, please.
One of the points that we made from the very outset in working with... let me go back. Pre-pandemic, we held a number of workshops with lots of people to say if we're all going to embark on net gain, we need to know what it should try and achieve. And one of the very early recommendations that came from that was that we need to see marine systems as ecosystems, and they need to be managed accordingly. Therefore, if we were going to identify targets, etc., they need to be targets based on a full understanding of ecosystems. And as a consequence, you know, we said at the time there has to be seen to be a real distinction, if you like, between terrestrial and coastal and marine, because terrestrial is very much more habitat, whereas coastal marine is very much more ecosystem. So I think the answer to your question from my perspective is, if there is truly an ecosystem approach to managing the sea, and net gain and things like that are part of that, then there's no reason why there shouldn't be a proper, full ecological outcome.
Thank you, Peter. Caroline, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's a great question actually, and it came up quite a lot in the work we were looking at when we were thinking about barriers to unlocking finance. Because often what you find is that, and I'd be interested in Henrietta's thoughts, but I think often when you talk to investors, the discussion starts with they want to put their money into a thing that's going to, they can see it happening on the ground, you know, quite soon, active restoration as we would call it probably in this room. And that shift to understanding about how we can unlock investment to help us with the less tangibles, I suppose, but definitely as, if not more important in many cases, around removal of pressure and that continued recovery, which extends to monitoring particularly, and kind of building that bank of data and understanding about, yes, this is working, yes, it's continuing to work, here are the benefits that we're reaping from this restoration and recovery from a societal perspective. All of that costs money and is really challenging to fund. So one of the big discussions that we had around the nature markets or the natural capital markets piece was, how do you kind of really think through the value model or the value proposition around those things that aren't necessarily about active restoration. So I think what I was really encouraged about was that there was a lot of ambition in that space, both from policymakers but also investors. They want to do it, they just don't have the mechanisms right now. So that's the challenge for us. How do we build those mechanisms in a way that unlocks that and gives us that continuation and that those kind of wider opportunities to bring money into that kind of pressure reduction, recovery, ongoing monitoring space, which is just so key for what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Sarah?
Just so, completely agree with you, and we've struggled with the strategy for grant giving. We've come under we've got the 5 themes, which is helpful for framing what we're doing. It's helpful for reporting on what we're doing. It doesn't convey the ecosystem side of it terribly well. And hopefully we'll get better at that, more fine-grained as we go forward. What we are finding very much is that there is enough practical restoration to get on with. So I refuse to allow kind of excellent to be the enemy of good enough. Let's get on with it. Let's get the wellies on. Let's get the waders on. Let's get the snorkels going. Let's get out there and plant stuff. At the same time as we're also working with Fisheries Management Scotland to say, how do we go up the rivers? How do we go up the glens? How do we do more catchment based? How do we do more pressure reduction? How do we have that more ecosystems approach? So don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. Get on with it. There's lots to do. And then work towards that ecosystem approach. We find talking to donors, they're very much open to that. They want to see stuff on the ground. They absolutely want to plant a flag. We try very hard to say to them, yes, but you've got to pay for the back room. You've got to pay for the baseline survey. You've got to pay for that whole ecosystem thinking as well. So it's building and coming, I think, is the way to say it.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to go, Laura?
Yeah, there was just something I wanted to add to that. I thought that was a really good point about not letting perfection get in the way of progress. And we've been really happy to be involved in this Natural Capital Ecosystem Assessment Programme upcoming to think about how you do build that evidence, because as we're slightly further offshore than other people, trying to build the evidence that people recognise and how you merge that with the intertidal zone and other areas we recognise, really trying to build those evidences and bring them together in a way that people recognise is quite hard but really important. So we're really glad that a lot of people are engaging in that process.
Great, thank you all. Can I take another question, please? Yes, in the centre here.
Hi, I was just wondering on your views about how best to bring landowners to the table in terms of the kind of source to sea, but also I'm particularly interested in managed realignment projects for salt marsh restoration, but maybe looking for compensatory freshwater habitat and things like that as well. So having the money is great and having the scientists is great, but how do we get the landowners on board so that we can either purchase or change the management of their land?
Thank you. Would anybody like to have a crack at that one about landowners? We have a landowner on the panel.
Do you want me to go? So yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I think it's we have a lot of conversations about kind of policy, and sometimes landowners always last to kind of be brought into that conversation. I think we're very fortunate to be part of the discussion because of the wider relationships and discussions that we're involved in more broadly. What I would say is that a lot of the strategic landowners, if that's not the wrong word, many of them are in the room today, but I think also it's thinking about when you look up catchment, which I think is particularly your question when we're thinking about that kind of transition from coast and then into the kind of freshwater space. That is a really interesting conundrum, because often then what you're doing is you're moving from an environment where you have relatively few, I use that term sort of slightly advisedly, landowners into a space where you often have multiple landowners, even in a relatively small area, and there are very generational connections to why that land's important and the way that they engage with it, and therefore the concept of changing the way that that land is managed to deliver environmental benefit becomes a conversation that becomes quite complicated quite quickly. But for me, all that does is highlight the importance of having them in the room as early as possible. And you will know as well as I do that those projects, and those particularly those wholescape, landscape and seascape projects, shout out for you, Angus, that have worked really well, have been where those landowners have been in the room from as early as possible. I think what's going to be really interesting, if we see some of the ELMS, so the landscape management scale projects that are coming through now, that are really starting from that point, where the landowners are part of the project from the outset, and therefore we should be going on the journey as more of a collective. There's going to be some really valuable lessons to learn from those projects to think about how we can roll them forward. But I think the other thing is that as so much of this good work continues to happen, and we get better as a community at telling people about them and kind of raising awareness and sharing the benefits of being involved in that kind of activity and breaking down not just the reality of the complexity, but also the perception of the complexity and the challenge of being involved in those kinds of activities. That will help unlock that sort of two-way communication, which I think is really key for landowners. And I think we're going to have more and more examples of what really good looks like, taking account of the fact that we'll learn along the way, as Laura was saying, that we can just keep bringing it to life. Because I think sometimes the challenge is it's very conceptual, unless this is your world. And therefore you need to kind of make it tangible and engaging and understandable for people who are not, who are not ecologists, and they're not flood risk scientists, and they just don't necessarily inherently understand what it is we're trying to do. So all of those things I think are going to kind of come together and help. But it's really important that we don't forget that they are part of that jigsaw too in having successful restoration outcomes.
Yeah, I would just add, based on the experience with WWT, and they are more the experts on this than me, and obviously we have got colleagues from WWT in the room, I'd definitely recommend speaking to them, because certainly landowners are one of the big challenges that we found in terms of trying to move forward with this kind of project. And I think you're absolutely right in making the point that they've got to be brought in, and I think we also need to be better at communicating about the opportunities here. We're not just talking about taking something away that has existed previously. We're talking about new opportunities. We've talked a lot, different people have mentioned about economic opportunities from some of these restoration projects, and it's kind of all of that communication as well. But it's very difficult. We're dealing with people and their land. And yeah, I would recommend speaking to WWT about some of their particular experiences in the project that we're working on together around bringing on board landowners, because it has been a big challenge.
Thanks. Johnson and Peter?
Just a small point on salt marshes particularly. I have a lot of experience of working on salt marshes and managed alignment, etc. Everything that the previous two speakers have said has been spot on about environmental opportunities. But with regards to the salt marshes particularly, and Will Manning may say a bit more about this tomorrow, I sincerely hope he does, there he is, he's waving, good man, is that the link between managed realignment as an environmental opportunity and managed realignment as part of shoreline management plans and the future management of coasts, to me, is absolutely inseparable. Therefore, there is this massive strategic opportunity around the coast to look where we should be carrying out managed realignment as part of effective shoreline management plan for the future, and that's where some of the great opportunities lie, and it's those landowners that need to be brought into the equation.
Great, thank you all. I'm going to take a question here, and then I'm going to go to one at the back, and then I'm going to look over this side of the room. That's okay?
Hi, does that work? Yeah. It's a question for Sarah. I've got a background in working with community foundations and philanthropic funds, and I'm aware that the Community Foundation in Scotland manages a good chunk of the wind farm funds, the terrestrial farm funds, for community benefits. And I'm wondering if the model that you described reminds me a lot of the model that is already set up on land for wind farms. And I'm wondering if you perceive any issues in the future with being set up through Nature Scot for maybe attracting more private donors and philanthropy into what you're doing, as well as the corporates?
I think we are, we're part of the, I tried to emphasize in my speech, we are making the cake bigger. That's our role. So if private donations want to come to us and we're the right place for them, great. If they want to go somewhere else and we feel there's a better fit somewhere else, that's part of our networking service, if you like, is to try and match money with opportunity. The sky's the limit in terms of what we can do and how we do it. I don't think that it's a barrier. I think it's kind of raising the bar across the piece to say, here are all the different opportunities that you can invest in. Here are all the different ways that nature can be supported and that things can change. So the more the merrier really is how I approach it. Did that answer your question? Yeah, let's talk over coffee, very definitely.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for that. There was a question at the back there. If you could put your hand up again. Just a reminder if people can introduce themselves and their organisation if they are representing one.
Hello, Amy Pryor, Coastal Partnerships Network. This is actually a question for Henrietta. I was wondering when you were talking, it was striking me that the fund that you've put together seems to be a mix of social impact investment, or could be, and natural capital investment. And you mentioned in your presentation about it's crucial to have community benefits. So I was wondering what, from the donor's perspective within the program that you set up, is a good community benefit. What are they actually looking for beyond the more sort of long-term conceptual resilience to flood risk, for example? Are there any more direct community benefits that you could state as an example?
Yeah, sure. So the funding that I talked about, the £100 million that we set aside when we sort of launched our net zero target, is philanthropic funding, very much with the idea that actually as an investor we want to be able to invest in more of these projects, and we want to see more scaling of these projects, and that means they need to be investable so that they can really take off at scale. So we're using philanthropic funding in this case in order to help overcome some of those barriers to making this truly investable for the investment part of Aviva. So we are looking for a lot of different things in the projects in terms of the carbon and the biodiversity and the flood resilience and other social and community benefits. We have seen across a number of the different projects we funded that there are opportunities in terms of job creation, and particularly where they're in kind of rural locations and coastal locations where that's a real benefit. There are educational opportunities, as well as developing kind of new opportunities and kind of new businesses almost out of some of these opportunities. So I think there are significant social opportunities that come alongside them. The thing that's really been driving us, though, is carbon. And I think that's because currently we really see that as the mechanism that's driving the financing and will drive investment at the moment. We as a business haven't particularly seen biodiversity net gain as a real driver of funding. That is changing, we see that changing, but that doesn't impact on us as Aviva currently in terms of why we would look to invest in some of these types of projects. For us, the carbon is that driver. But we also know that we don't just want to buy cheap carbon credits from somewhere. That isn't how we want to do carbon credits. We have a need to do carbon because we've set these net zero targets, but we know the way in which we want to do them. And so we're trying to help there to be more of these good quality carbon projects that also deliver all of these other benefits. But what we would love to see in the future is more obligation on businesses to need to invest in biodiversity gain, to need to invest in more resilience, climate resilience particularly, and to need to invest in economies, in local economies. We don't particularly see that at the moment. At the moment, the carbon is really the main driver rather than that social impact side or even the biodiversity side for us. Those are kind of the things we want to do alongside, but we see the carbon as the financing mechanism.
Thanks, Henrietta. Thanks for the question, Amy. I'm going to sweep around this way, so have a think about questions here, but I just want to link that question to Laura, really. You mentioned in your presentation about community, etc., and you talked about the kind of backlash in Cornwall. I just wondered here why you haven't had that backlash and what are you doing for the community, and have you any investment from the community?
Yeah, really good question, actually. It's been very interesting to see that. Until earlier this year, there'd been no real problems with seaweed farming, and every story was a good news story because there's so much benefit to come from it. When we set up here, actually, Wave here, grew up as a fisherman in the fishing community, and when we started, we actually sat on the trawlers and the potting boats with people and worked out where we could work in harmony with people here. And that went really well and helped us with the licensing, and it helped us work with the community. People have been really excited. We haven't had direct investment except about 2 years ago we did run a crowdfunder project, actually. A lot of people from the area got involved. We had an event where everyone came on when it was a success, and people were just really happy to be involved in a positive story in the community, where so often when people come and do news broadcasts from Scarborough, it's always about the bad news stories of coastal communities. It's very rarely about the good news, so people felt really proud to be part of something good, and we really enjoyed that experience, and it's been really good. So I think the way we've gone about it, working with people, and the sort of way we've looked at sort of co-design with other marine users has been a helpful part of that, rather than coming in and telling people what they should want to have. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Laura. I've got a question here. There, please, and then we'll move to 1, 2 over here as well.
Hi, Emma McGee from the Environment Agency. I'm delighted to hear so many people talk about a safe space, about not making perfect the enemy of good, and failing fast. As a project manager delivering salt marsh projects, can you give some practical advice how we can help make that a reality on the ground? Because it sometimes feels like the aspirations that we have at a strategy and a high level don't always translate down to the frameworks and the structures that we put in place for delivering these projects. And I'd love to hear some ideas how I can build that in. Thanks.
Thank you. So it's a toughie. So translating that high-level strategy into delivery. Any advice? Sarah?
I'm going to say empower communities. I was talking earlier on today, as I was going around some of these great displays, I was talking about the need for, there's a lot of communities who are very keen, they're switching on to what's happening in the coast and seas and switching on to the environmental issues that we're facing, but they are super low baseline in terms of their knowledge about how to do it, how to get engaged. And what we need to do is to offer them accessible information about how to get engaged and what to do. That, in my experience in Scotland, certainly has been, there's this kind of feedback loop between the process and the policy and the communities, or you want to put the communities up here and the process and the policy, let's go side to side, why not? But helping those communities to understand, Solway Firth Partnership do a fantastic job on that. The Coastal Network in Scotland has been working really hard at that to bring communities up to speed and to show them how they can get engaged. But it's becoming more complex as people are getting their wetsuits on and getting more involved, and that requires more education, more engagement, more ocean literacy, more engagement in policy, and getting the populace knowledgeable about what to do and how to do it. That's tough to fund.
Thank you, Sarah. Did you want to add something, Peter?
Very briefly, some years ago I sort of kind of summarised it as saying it works both ways, but you have to involve people, you have to inform people, and you have to influence people. but you also have to be prepared to be informed, influenced and involved in return. In other words, there's quite often a two-way conversation going on here. Different people see things in different ways. Engaging people, we talk about all the time now, quite rightly, you know, and that I absolutely support as a consequence of what I'm saying. But I have to say, the single biggest issue in delivering anything like managed realignment is getting through the licensing barriers. You know, and your organisation is one of them. You know, it's a truism, but the difficulties in getting licences and the need to answer questions and questions and questions and going back and going back and going back over is what really slows projects down. I mean,
but Duncan says we can now get flexible licences.
Well, I heard about that. I'm looking forward to that because, you know, I was reminding myself that I did a couple of managed realignment projects on the Humber. I think the total cost was £4.7 million. I was asked to say how much of that was just getting the approvals, and it was something like, I can't remember now, but it's something like £1.8 million of that 4.7 was simply getting approvals. That's the biggest holdback, put it that way.
Thank you, that's great. Do you want a quick one?
I just want to really quickly say that I acknowledge everything that's just been said, and I just sort of think that I want to encourage people to think positively about those changes that I've seen in aspiration and enthusiasm and ambition to simplify that process. I think that I definitely feel that there are a lot of incredibly clever people who sit in our regulatory sort of space who are really keen to unlock that. It's recognised as a real barrier. It's recognised that it sucks up a lot of money that could otherwise be spent on active restoration. And I think folk are working quite hard to think about that. But they need input from people who are kind of living it and have lived through it and really understand. Because it's kind of it can be quite a general statement. The licensing is really hard and expensive. That's really hard to unpick and then fix. Yeah. So I think what I think is important and is incumbent on all of us who are active in this space is to be really specific about the thing that's problematic and difficult and where it gets stuck, just so that then they can kind of think about that more broadly. And the only other point, this one of the recommendations that came through the roadmap, and there's a number of these kind of, we call them natural capital labs, but I think it's kind of bringing through the ambitions and the principles through both the M&CA programme, but also the wider work that have been run by DEFRA colleagues and their equivalents across the UK in terms of creating like a licensing kind of sandbox space where you can do that fail fast, learn from it, move forward, where you're kind of setting out with more of a deliberate intention to adapt as you go, which is quite a shift and I think could be incredibly helpful as long as feeding into that is that genuine experience and knowledge about, well, actually, this is the really crunchy, tricky bit. This is where we really got stuck. This is, do you know what I mean? That kind of specificity is going to be really key.
No, it's fine, thank you. I want to cram in some questions. The gentleman with his hand up there, please, and then we're going to come to the lady in the front.
Thank you. Anthony Perth, Historic England. With all the references made to communities, landowners, the generational contacts and just transition, how can the value of cultural services be built more into the investment matrix? Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Cultural. So we talked about communities, talked about investment, nature. Does anybody have a view on the question? Henrietta, looks like you're going for it. It's a battle.
And I'm not an expert at all, so I feel like I should caveat this. There's probably people in the room who are much better placed to be able to talk about it. But all I can talk to is the conversations that came up through the roadmap work, where, a bit like Richard's question, it was about how do you recognise those broader benefits and the kind of true complexity of the value that society kind of receives from in this case in terms of habitats and sort of species. So within that was the context around social value in relation to kind of job opportunities and so on, and business opportunities, as Henrietta's touched on, but also that kind of cultural value, historic value, that sort of sense of place. And there's been some great work that's been done by the likes of the Wildlife Trusts, WWT, and folk like that who've kind of been really thinking about how do you articulate those kind of cultural benefits that come through these kinds of activities and talk about them in a way that can be consistently understood, which is always the challenge I feel with kind of cultural value. inevitably it means something different to every individual, but how do you bring consistency through so that you can really start shining a light on that? And I think, again, the MN CEO programme and the wider programmes under the Natural Capital Assessment Programme, they're also doing a lot of work on that too. So I don't know, they might be worth having a chat to in more detail during the breaks.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that. I mean, it is a big challenge around that kind of measuring and kind of being able to define how that benefit is, exists. And I guess that's the challenge in terms of becoming investable. Is how are you going to be able to, you mentioned definition, but then also the measuring and validation that there has been that benefit. And some things are obviously much easier to quantify than others. And so it does come back to what is it that we're talking about in order for that to be something appealing for investing in and really valuing. And I think that is a big challenge. And we all want to, do the right thing and kind of be involved in projects that are demonstrating that they are doing the right thing by local communities and culture and so on. But it's very difficult. And I mean, we've mentioned greenwashing. I think a couple of people have mentioned greenwashing earlier. And certainly from a business point of view, we're very nervous about making any kind of claims that we can't prove and that we can't really kind of put data behind to say we've absolutely had this impact. And I think that's always going to be one of the challenges with some of those other types of benefit, that it's really difficult to kind of demonstrate that.
I just wanted to add, from a cultural heritage perspective, a town like Scarborough grew up with the fishing industry as one of its major players. A lot of people here are very proud of that heritage, and that's the same around a lot of our coast. And as we all know, a lot of the fish have gone and people have had to change, and it's been really, really challenging for people to adjust. So some of these new projects and industries we're talking about, the fishing industry can get involved in if we find ways and actually bring that heritage forward and bring that culture forward. And if we can bring everyone together as part of that journey, then I think we're really onto a winner for protecting, restoring and moving our cultural heritage forward.
Thank you very much. We've got time for one last question from this lady here. If you can just keep it really quick, please, and ask some quick answers before we finish.
Thank you. Helen J, National Trust. Just reflecting on Duncan's earlier excellent talk about some of the challenges, how for investors can we effectively de-risk restoring habitats in an inherently dynamic and therefore risky environment?
Great question to finish on.
Yeah, I mean, it is very challenging to de-risk it, and I think we've mentioned a few things that are related. So we talked about measurement and verification. So we need to be able to define benefits from projects. We need to be able to value those, so there has to be a reason for us to invest in them. So I mentioned about carbon currently gives us a reason to invest in these projects, but we need more reasons to invest in them in order to make sure we're reflecting all of the other benefits that these projects can deliver. We need to be able to measure those and demonstrate them and verify them. All of those things will help. And so, the work that's ongoing to make sure we've got, for example, like the Salt Marsh Carbon Code, but then, you can imagine equivalents to that for all sorts of different aspects of benefits of projects. We need those to be in place in order that we can kind of robustly demonstrate the impacts that we're having. And then I think that, really helps to kind of de-risk it for us as a business, so that we can be able to demonstrate the benefit we're having and knowing that we are delivering the value that we think we're going to get from our investment.
Thank you. Peter, then Sarah.
Quite simply, we need legislation to accompany net gain, etc., that's not restricting, that's not constraining, that's not demanding certainty. We need to acknowledge that we don't know a lot about restoration techniques, so we need research, we need innovation, we need, importantly, the legislation to acknowledge that and accept that. Industry will invest where there's certainty, and if the certainty lies in strict interpretation of legislation, that's where they'll invest. If we want to get wider than that, then the legislation needs to reflect that. It's as simple as that.
We're very lucky in SMEEF. We've got a lot of thought leaders who are investing in what we're doing, and there's it's making that virtuous circle of try, test, learn, monitor, learn, exchange learning, keep learning, it's a very dynamic environment, and we're very lucky to have these partners come on board and to give us the money to get that testing done. And I think going back to the licensing side of things, it's feeding back into the licensing side of things and letting them understand what's actually happening out there. They're not out there, boots on the ground, very thinly stretched teams across all of the areas that we're dealing with. So it's feeding back to them all the time and giving them the information, saying what's actually happening, and just being. I'm very lucky in that Nature Scott and all the partners are very open to the risk of failure. And as long as we're learning from it, as long as we're kind of aware of it happening, then they're absolutely up for it. And I think industry is really welcoming that and saying, right, we'll keep giving you money. As long as you're understanding why we're failing, that's answering a gap in the knowledge base.
Thank you. Sorry, we haven't got any time for more questions, but I really apologise to those who had their hands up. That was a really great session. I'm going to make an announcement in a second, so sit tight for lunch. But first of all, can I just put your hands together and thank our great panel.